How's it going, everyone? This is the first time that I'm creating content for NASCAR. I'm excited, bringing something new to the table, and I have a special guest, first time collaborating with, which is an honor. Chris. Chris, man, thank you so much for hopping in and doing this with me. And can't wait to talk about the classic Jeff Gordon in his peak years.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun for people who don't know, as far as NASCAR drivers, there are certain ones that are just cut and bred in a different way. And what a lot of people don't realize about Jeff Gordon is arguably, depending on who you want to talk to in the industry, he probably was the first driver who had what we like to call the mercenary pit crew. And what this did was it changed the game as far as pit strategy. And look, you see it today with Hendrick Motorsports. You look at a guy like William Byron, two of his three wins this year came directly because of pit strategy and nothing else. Uh, Denny Hamlin, yeah, I know he might have jumped the gun slightly to win a race, but again, he got out of the pit first. Uh, this is part of the evolving landscape of NASCAR where, it's not just the driver necessarily as much as it's the pit crew, the crew chief, and such that put you in the position to win more now than ever.
Yeah, man, that's the thing. Like a driver can be great, but it takes a collective amount of effort. For the driver to have success, you gotta have a great team around you. And Jeff Gordon, he had that during those mid to late 90s. I mean, what he did from 95 to 99 was unbelievable. 2001, I gotta mention 2001 as well. He had a great year. But out of all of those years, 1998, he was flawless. I mean, he won 13 races. Yeah, he won 13 races that year. And no other driver until Jimmie Johnson has won double digit victories. So 1998, he was on a whole different tear. He was great in 95. I mean, in terms of speed, 95, 96, 2001 as well. But 98, he was just flawless. If you got to pick one year that Gordon was just like you couldn't stop him, it was 98.
It was probably 98 because as people will often say, he went an entire season on almost every track where his average late run speed was in the top six. That's hard to do. I couldn't even imagine it being done today. His average finish was 5.7. So basically, he was finishing almost in the top five every single race. That's you're not seeing that. You now, if you're lucky, you might see a guy with a seven, maybe an eight, and even that falls off a little bit. Um, most of your championship guys now are like around ninth or 10th average position. Like I said, occasionally, like you have Kyle Larson, who literally, for the lack of a better term, if you put him on an intermediate track, he's going to finish in the top five. I mean, his car could be basically you could put duct tape on it, bubble gum, to keep it together. He'll still finish in the top five. Guy like Ryan Blaney, maybe now he's at that level on super speedway tracks like Talladega, uh, Daytona. Talladega, this one of the few guys I know in the last maybe decade, first, second, and second in his last three races. Jeff Gordon was that dominant across the board from 95 to 98. And obviously, 98 was the pinnacle of it. And if you want to go a little further into this, Miguel, even as late as 2015, Jeff Gordon had a shot to win a NASCAR championship. It seems crazy, but he had that long of a career where you could sit there, look back and go, wow, why did he retire? Oh yeah, that was because he just kind of, he got in so early that he wanted to get it. Look, he said it himself. I have a career destined for the front office. I want to do things. And he wasn't in, he wasn't, let's put it this way, he wasn't an old 43, 44 when he retired. Not a lot of guys can say that. I mean, I point out to Kurt Busch, who, unfortunately, he had a concussion that ended his career basically. And the definite difference in what you call appearance of age in him compared to a guy like Jeff Gordon, who, yeah, okay, Gordon has some gray now. I understand that, but he's still as fiery and competitive as ever. And you talk to anybody who raced in the late 90s, and the first thing they say is that that goddamn guy was just impossible to race against. He'd be right up on you.
Yeah, and that reminds me of an interview that I saw a couple of weeks ago, and it was a virtual interview between Jeff Gordon and Rusty Wallace. And Rusty Wallace hated his guts in those years. He hated him because he just kept kicking their ass, him and Dale Earnhardt. And one would argue that Dale Earnhardt Sr., he pushed Jeff Gordon to reach bigger heights. Um but I just found that interview so funny because you could see it in Rusty Wallace's face, just reliving like, the amount of hatred he had for him. But friendly rivalry, but yeah, he hated getting killed by Jeff Gordon in those years. But it was a great era, those 80s, 90s. If you want to go even back to the 70s, like just classic NASCAR, those were some great drivers you had there. The competition was on a whole different level.
Yeah.
But in the era that in those years that Jeff Gordon was driving, to go up against great drivers like Rusty Wallace, Dale Earnhardt, um,
You got the
I'm
Waltrip
forgetting my
season. Darrell Waltrip,
their wall trip.
tail
There
end of
we
his
go.
career.
Yep.
Michael Waltrip on super speedways, for example, who was
I feel bad for Michael Waltrip because when he won Daytona in 2001, it came the same day that Dale Earnhardt died, so that completely overshadowed the emotion they was feeling. And it was what's so crazy about that day is that if you've seen the documentary, Michael Waltrip, like he just couldn't catch a break, kept losing time after time after time after time. And then when he finally got that monkey off his back, which came on that February 18th, 2001, you were waiting on Dale Earnhardt, to to appreciate that you won. Um, and then the fact that you had his brother on the booth getting emotional, seeing his brother winning as well, and then for all of that to get overshadowed by Dale Earnhardt's tragic accident, which I'll never forget the news coverage. That was horrible.
Hey, you think of like, and I remember Jeff Gordon saying something about this later. So we really didn't know how bad it was until it was too late. Uh, even then, even 20 something years ago, the media had the story way before anyone else did. That's down there. You talk to some more notable members, even the booth. I know when Darrell Waltrip found out. I mean, literally, like there's a telco feed somewhere. I forget. You won't see it on YouTube anymore because I think they took it off out of respect to the Earnhardt family. But I can remember it being on as recently as maybe a few years ago, right before the pandemic started. And you see the look of just sheer like I've never seen a person turn pale white in my life like that. And it was not only heartbreaking, but you could see it throughout the NASCAR community. And Jeff Gordon actually said it. He's like, I lost one of my best friends on a track that I never thought something like that could happen.
Yeah, that was, it's one of the saddest moments in NASCAR history, without a doubt. But Yeah, I mean, it was the it would have been interesting, because we know Davey Allison, he died way too soon in back in '93. I always thought like it would have been interesting had that if he was around while Jeff Gordon was going through this era, it would have been fun to see those guys drive around those years. But it didn't get to because Jeff Gordon broke into the scene in '92, and then Davey Allison gone in '93. So but
It's
yeah,
cool.
before Dale Earnhardt, Davey Allison, his accident was a shock to the NASCAR world. But Dale Earnhardt was just
On another level.
I mean, it was tough, but Jeff Gordon, man, I mean, what that man did, in those mid and late '90s was just
Yep.
flat out unbelievable.
Think
The
about
amount of
think about how
wins, the
far that.
domination.
Yep.
Go
You
ahead.
had wins. You had obviously the top results. Uh, a great thing looked at. I don't think you're going. I could be wrong on this because there's always a driver that comes along that does something crazy that sets the bar in a different way. But barring something unforeseen, I don't think you're going to see a driver go 3 straight years with not only 20 plus top five finishes in each year, but 10 plus wins. So he racked up 33 wins in 3 seasons. And yeah, I understand the amount of races one, it's not 36 like it is now. Um, great example. It was 30. It was 30 when he broke in for his first full season. I don't count the cameo race that he made in 92. It's just not gonna happen. Um, but it's amazing to see the longevity. And like we said, he had 4 straight years where his average finish was inside the top 10. Along with that, people forget he had a lot of bad luck in 95 and still won 7 times. This was a guy who had an average start fifth, flat out five. I don't think I've ever seen that over an entire season, other than maybe Earnhardt in the late 80s, early 90s. Obviously, Richard Petty in the 60s and 70s, but
King.
it's it's that rare. So he was able to combine what I would call extremely fast qualifying speed with practice times that I don't know how many course records he set in the late 90s. I mean, yeah, they were broken eventually by, yeah, Kyle Larson. I know, especially some of the intermediate tracks. It was kind of comical to like look through later. It's like, wait, Gordon is that fast? Wait, that wasn't like one of his strong track. That didn't matter. And that was the kind of driver, that Jeff Gordon was. He not only sought perfection, he sought it in every aspect of the race, on the track and off the track. That's a heck of a combination. And a lot of that was from he saw drivers like Dale Earnhardt. He saw the relentlessness of a driver like Mark Martin, who never won a NASCAR. It's crazy to believe that Martin never. It's mind blowing that some guys never won a NASCAR title. He was one of those guys, but he had that just you almost want to call it a stubbornness in his drive. And Gordon never, he forgave people. He never forgot. When you see it on the track every so often, he'd lose his cool to send a message. I can remember a couple Daytona 500s in particular where it was just like, oh, here comes Jeff Gordon. And there goes Jeff Gordon right up somebody's spoiler, and there goes the spin. Quite a few races where I can remember Gordon just he tossed one to prove a point.
Speaking of Daytona 500, There's a like a short documentary on YouTube that is like 20, no. It's like 43 minutes or so. And it's about the 97 Daytona 500. Basically, it's like behind the scenes. I don't know if you've seen it, but if
Yeah.
you haven't, I'll share a link with you so you can watch it. And it's basically about Jeff Gordon, him preparing himself for Daytona 500, and fantastic documentary.
Yeah. For those that don't know, back in the late 90s, and there was a level of, obviously the point system was different. Um, but Gordon goes on this insane run, like right off the bat. So you kind of looked and said, all right, he wins Daytona, obviously. He leads 40 laps, wins with relative ease. Comes back the next week, everybody is expecting a letdown at Rockingham. Doesn't happen. Blitzes blitzes the field late in the race, leads 43 laps, almost cruises to a win. And that set the stage for a season where literally he won in clusters, as they put it. He won in a way, Miguel, that he was able to coast his way to a title, which is rare. Um, he never did particularly well. It's funny, in the late 90s, he never did particularly well at Atlanta for some reason, particularly the 97 season. For some, obviously, the early rack, as I call it, Atlanta 1 or Atlanta Spring. And then obviously the second race at Atlanta, he started way back in 37th because he had to go to the back of the field. Didn't matter. But, again, struggled much the same, had a hard, more or less survived to get up to 17th. But he he did something that was just rare at that time, and you knew there was something special there. There's there's races that he should, like Bristol's a great example. He dominated almost the entire middle portion of the race, led 188 laps out of the 500. Got bumped by Rusty Walls. Uh, it's that ended his Saturday night then. But again, there were so many times where it wasn't just that he was leading laps; he was leading bunches of laps. He was outright dominating races. And I, look, the best one of that year, and it's the one that a lot of people will point out to, is Martinsville, where he leads. Now, Martin Truex did this later, but still, leading over 400 laps in a 500 lap race. Understand, Martinsville is a tiny little, I'll put this up for people, just to see. It looks like a literal paperclip when you race it. It's barely a half mile. Laps go by in a blink of an eye. Jeff Gordon at one point almost lapped the field. He almost lapped the entire field. I think at one point 8 or 9 cars were on the lead lap. Led 431 laps. But it's more than that. It's just the idea that there were times where nobody could touch this Hendrick car. The difference is, unlike Kyle Larson's magical season a couple years ago, is this. Gordon did this over a period of time, not just 1 year, not just 2 years. You could argue probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 years, where Jeff Gordon was the fastest, not only the fastest guy on the track, his pit crew was the best. He had the ownership group, obviously, Mr. Hendricks. I mean,
Yes.
the pedigree speaks for itself. 40 years, and as an owner, and the hundreds of wins. I mean, they just hit another milestone. It feels like they hit one like on a weekly basis. I used to joke the 1 year they went 1, 2, 3, 4. This year they swept a podium. Again, it's that kind of just out and out success. But before Jimmie Johnson, there was of course, Jeff Gordon. And you know what's coming next, Miguel? Okay, which one was the better driver?
There's always gonna be those questions,
That that is
always,
that is always
always.
that is always the big one. And I say to people, well, in court to be the guy, you kind of have to. Bret Hart somewhere is going to get mad with me, but you have to beat the guy. Um, you know, we'll argue whether Flair said that first or Bret Hart later, but
Hmm.
you look at this, and it's funny. There's a notable difference, and some will argue the era, some will argue again, but I'll say this: Jimmie Johnson's best run compared to Jeff Gordon's. Some will argue it was harder to win a NASCAR title when Jimmie Johnson did it, but the numbers don't lie. The average finish doesn't lie. The average qualifying position doesn't lie. The speed and practice lap metrics don't lie. Jeff Gordon was just that little bit faster at every turn.
We just
Uh,
gotta appreciate greatness when we see it, you know,
you're
because these guys are gonna be around forever. So you gotta appreciate greatness while we see them on TV. So um, but
I,
yeah,
I was lucky. I mean, I was at that age, early 20s where you could really appreciate what you're seeing. Uh, you know, you, the you know,
every era is different. Rules are gonna change,
yep.
points are gonna change. So you just gotta appreciate, the great athletes, the great players that are there in front of you. And and God bless YouTube because YouTube puts classics all over. YouTube has come a long way in that regard. So YouTube is the closest thing to a time machine. The
It
closest
pretty
thing.
pretty much is. And for those that don't know, you can go on YouTube and search a couple NASCAR channels out there. I believe there's the what's called the NASCAR channel now that airs classic races in their entirety. Most are without commercials now, which is nice. Trust us when we say this. Uh, the commercials now kind of ruin it a little bit for everybody. Back then, way different landscape. You'd get but one, maybe two commercials during say like the Daytona 500, 500s of the 80s, and they'd be right back on. So you go through the satellite feeds and you'll hear them talking in the background. It's something to behold. It's almost a lost art because you don't see it as often anymore. You might see some of the more, I'd say it stopped maybe 2010, 2011, but there are a few extra ones that they happen to do uncut. Listen to the announcers. I think even later on, Miguel, there's one with Jeff Gordon talking about like his days from the 97 500. It's pretty good stuff. And it's during like a 60-second outtake. And you hear like Dale Earnhardt Jr. in the radio when he's driving around. It's really funny stuff. I forget it was like a practice or something to that effect. And you hear him going, "Did you just like hit the wall?" No. Okay, then you're good. And he's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "If you're not close enough to the wall that you don't feel it, you're not driving fast enough at Daytona." And it was the same, and it's the same way on the track at Las Vegas. It's a mile and a half intermediate. And I can remember many drivers saying it's like if you don't feel like you're right up against the wall, you're not going to win. There's an edge that you almost have to cross to be that successful for that long. And that's what Jeff Gordon was.
Well, Chris, we're gonna wrap it right there. This was fantastic. I can't wait to do one of these again. Um, Talk about some classic drivers or classic matchups that happened back then or even the modern. But man, this was a great way to kick off. make some content of NASCAR. So, but man, thank you so much, Chris. This was fantastic, man. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.